All right, today we're tackling a book that's, believe it or not, only 96 pages long. It reads like a story you'd tell a kid, but it somehow became this massive global phenomenon. And yeah, it's a super simple fable, but it's one that has kicked off decades of arguments in boardrooms and break rooms all over the world. And when I say phenomenon, I am not kidding. We're talking over 28 million copies sold worldwide. It's been translated into 37 different languages. I mean, back in 2005, Amazon said it was their #1 best-selling book of all time. So yeah, it definitely struck a nerve. So, what is all the fuss about? What is this simple fable really getting at? Well, behind this little story of two mice and two little people, there's this really powerful and honestly pretty controversial message about the one thing that's constant in all of our lives: change. Okay, so to really get this story, you gotta understand its main metaphors. First up, the cheese. Now, this is not about a nice block of cheddar. Cheese is a symbol for whatever it is you want out of life. A good job, a loving relationship, money, your health, peace of mind. It's the thing we're all chasing. And if cheese is what we want, then the maze is where we go to look for it. You can think of it as your office, your whole industry, your community, maybe even your family. It's basically the world you have to navigate to find your cheese. So the story itself is super simple. You've got four characters living in this maze: two mice, their names are Sniff and Scurry, and two little people, Hem and Haw. Every day, they all head to a place called Cheese Station C, where they found this huge, seemingly endless pile of their favorite food. Life is good. They get comfortable, maybe a little too comfortable, and then bam! One day, they show up and all the cheese is gone. Now that moment, the moment the cheese just disappears, that's what this whole story is about. It reveals the true nature of these four characters, and each one represents a really fundamental way that we humans respond to sudden, unexpected change. So as we go through them, I want you to ask yourself, which one of these sounds the most like me? All right, let's break these four down. First, you've got Sniff. He's the one who kind of senses change early on and gets ready for it. Then there's Scurry, who doesn't overthink. He just springs into action. Go, go, go. On the other side of the coin, you have Hem. Hem denies and resists change. He just wants things to go back to the way they were. And finally, there's Haw. Haw starts out resistant, just like Hem, but he eventually learns to adapt. The real heart of the book, though, is Haw's journey. Once he finally works up the courage to leave that empty cheese station, he is terrified. But as he starts moving through the maze, he has these little breakthroughs, these aha moments, and he writes them on the walls, hoping his friend Hem will see them, and for us, the readers, to learn from them. And this is his first huge realization. If you do not change, you can become extinct. It's a pretty harsh truth, right? But it's what gets him to finally move. He gets that just standing still, hoping things will magically go back to the old way, isn't just a bad strategy, it's a dangerous one. In this view, adapting isn't just a nice idea, it's about survival. And this is the central question of the entire book. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Haw realizes that all the fears he's built up in his head are way, way worse than anything he's actually finding in the maze. This one question becomes the key that unlocks him from his paralysis. It's a challenge to all of us, really, to separate what's a real risk from what's just imagined fear. This next lesson is all about anticipation. Smell the cheese often so you know when it is getting old. See, unlike Hem and Haw, the mice were actually paying attention. They noticed the cheese supply was getting smaller. It's basically a call to be vigilant, to pay attention to the signs so you can see change coming, instead of being totally blindsided by it. It's about being proactive instead of reactive. And here is the big payoff. Haw learns that clinging to the past doesn't bring the old cheese back. Nope. It just stops him from finding new cheese. The second he starts moving, he starts finding new bits of energy, new sources of success. It's the movement itself, even into the unknown, that creates the opportunity. Okay, so this super simple story didn't just stay in the self-help section of the bookstore. It absolutely exploded into the corporate world, becoming this massive management tool. And that's where a really fierce debate started about what this book's message truly is. So, why did businesses latch onto this book so hard? Well, because corporate change is notoriously difficult. I mean, studies show that a staggering 70% of major change initiatives fail, and it's often because of employee resistance. Companies were just desperate for a simple way to get everyone on board with change, and this little book seemed like the perfect answer. And this led to two completely opposite ways of looking at the book. On one hand, supporters see it as this empowering guide for personal growth. But on the other hand, critics see it as a pretty cynical management tool designed to deflect responsibility. Basically, they see it as a way for bosses to tell employees that if they're struggling after a layoff, hey, it's their own fault for not adapting fast enough. You can definitely see the book's positive ideas in some huge corporate success stories, for sure. Think about Netflix. They were totally sniff, sensing the end of DVDs long before anyone else. IBM had a major ha moment, shifting its entire business from hardware to services. Amazon, they operate in permanent sniff mode, always looking for the next big thing. And Zoom was the ultimate scurry, just acting decisively and scaling like crazy when the pandemic hit. But the criticism is just as sharp. This comment from a Reddit user just perfectly captures that opposing view, that the book is, quote, something for bosses to give people they lay off so they blame themselves rather than the company for laying them off. Pretty blunt, right? And this really gets to the core of the critique. The fable just assumes that change is always this inevitable, neutral force of nature, like the weather. But as critics point out, it never, ever addresses the times when the cheese was moved simply because of bad, arbitrary, or just poorly thought-out corporate decisions. It puts the entire burden of adapting on the employee and never questions the leadership that caused the change in the first place. So, is it a wise fable or a corporate tool? No matter where you land on that debate, the story's final question really comes back to you. It kind of pushes us to look beyond the external maze and start examining our own internal mindset. And what's really interesting is that the author himself felt like this wasn't the end of the story. He actually wrote a sequel, Out of the Maze. And in it, he explored an even deeper idea. What if it's not just the external changes holding us back? What if our own beliefs are the real walls of the maze? And that brings us to the final and maybe most important point. The story challenges us to move beyond just adapting to what happens to us. It asks a much, much deeper question. What if the maze isn't your job or your environment? What if the maze is really the limiting beliefs you hold about yourself and the world? And what would you do if you realized one of those core beliefs just wasn't true?